Ladies and gentlemen, officially, I would like to thank you for joining us. Janusz, you can just tilt your screen slightly for us so we can all see you. There we go. All right. It's really great to have you on our live Food Focus webinar. We've done a number of recorded webinars, but it's always great to have you live because we can literally chat to you while we are having this conversation. So as I said, please won't you keep your questions coming. If there are questions at the end of the presentation that we haven't answered, we will do our best then to answer them in an article. So welcome to Food Focus, welcome to our Legal Eagle or Lunch with the Lawyer slot, and let's see what we can find out about Listeria. And although I've been in the industry for a long time, I'm really, really saddened by what has happened. We've all spent a lot of time and effort on food safety in the last 10, 15 years, but I have to say I'm really, really saddened by this news. So we are going to be asking some specific questions of our Legal Eagle today. Janusz Luterek is from Hahn & Hahn. I just would like to introduce him to you. So for those of you that don't know him, he's both a chemical engineer as well as an attorney. He is a partner at Hahn & Hahn. They specialize in technology law and intellectual property law. Janusz is a custodian member of the SAFOST group, and he sits on the council for the FSI at the Consumer Goods Council, and he also represents industry, or he sits on the Food Law Advisory Group for the Department of Health. So Janusz is very au fait with food law in South Africa, has been associated with the food industry for a very long time, and assisted many listed companies with labeling issues, with the Foodstuffs Act, and he's been extensively involved in the GMO debate as well. So Janusz, thank you so much for your time. We really do appreciate you allowing us to do this webinar at very short notice.
Great. Thank you very much for having me.
Right. So Janusz, we've seen the media release. We saw the minister yesterday on TV now officially informing the public of this outbreak. And I'd like to understand some of those legal implications. So first of all, we've known about the issue since September, and I have seen communications from the Consumer Goods Council as well as SAFOST appealing to their members to assist with providing information on possible sources of the outbreak. What would you do as a food producer based on this request for information? How would you be dealing with this issue if you were a manufacturer of food?
Sure. Look, what was surprising was that both in their request to the CGCSA and to SAFOST, they said that they would keep the information confidential when they receive it from the food manufacturer. So I would actually use that gap, because under normal circumstances, it would not be kept confidential. So this would actually be an opening for industry to come out with it while reducing, at the very least, the risk of bad publicity and of being exposed to lawsuits and so on from people who may not have suffered from Listeria at all and are simply riding on the back of it. So
absolutely.
I would actually comply with the request if I had the information. Of course, I think from your perspective, you probably agree with me, the chances are quite good that industry doesn't in fact have this information, because if they did, they would have prevented the Listeria outbreak.
Well, I think there are definitely pockets in industry that are testing. I know for the most part, if you are supplying into the retailers, that the absence of Listeria or controlled counts of Listeria would be part of your specification. So I think there are definitely pockets of industry that are on top of this issue, are testing on a regular basis, and even have to disclose this information to the retailers in order for their products to be accepted. I think, in this case, I would be concerned about those that are in industry that are not part of that scrutiny, and so therefore are not testing and don't even realize the importance of having to test. But obviously we will talk about that shortly. Why do you think the department is asking should they not be instructing? I mean, should they not be, you know, I was quite surprised that they're requesting. Does this mean the department isn't monitoring?
No, look, I mean, we all know that the department isn't monitoring. They don't have the resources. It's just in many spheres not happening for the resource reason. They're asking because they don't have any legal ground to demand things from industry on the basis of a suspicion. You know, they can't go around. I mean, they demand this. What would they demand next? So, you know, once they're aware of a particular source, etc., they can take action against that particular source. But when they are simply asking the whole of industry, they cannot make demands from the whole of industry. There's no legal basis for that.
Okay, so now talking about the legal basis for microorganisms, we have a regulation, Regulation 692, which addresses the microbiological standards of foodstuffs. So what does this regulation say in relation to Listeria?
No, well, very interestingly, this regulation doesn't mention Listeria at all in any manner for anything. The way that the regulation is written is it relates to a fairly limited number of products and a limited number of contaminants. It's not all bacteria and all products. And Listeria is not one of them, which I think is a big omission, especially I would say in hindsight, when we look where we are today, Listeria is being controlled almost on a voluntary basis.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, to me, that is definitely a serious concern, because at the end of the day, where would that put me as far as a producer is concerned? If there's no legislation in place telling me that I have to test for this organism in a particular food product, then if I'm not testing, how does that place me in the particular outbreak? I mean, in this particular situation? What does it mean for me as a manufacturer?
Sure. So what we need to remember, the Foodstuffs Act, let's forget the regulations for a moment, does make it a legal requirement that foodstuff which is sold must be safe and free of contamination. So you could actually be prosecuted under the Foodstuffs Act for contravening Section 2 because you are selling a contaminated foodstuff which is not safe. So that's from a criminal perspective under the Foodstuffs, Cosmetics and Disinfectants Act. I know it follows a bit further in today's discussion, but there's also the angle of the Consumer Protection Act and the requirement that a manufacturer, supplier, retailer, etc., may only sell a product which is safe and good quality, and that should they be selling a product which is not safe, which is harmful, hazardous, or defective, they would be liable to the consumer for any harm caused to that consumer, including, for example, through listeriosis.
Okay, so it doesn't in this. So what if I understand you? What you're saying, it doesn't really matter. Is or particular organism isn't covered by the regulation. We have the catch-all in terms of the act.
Yes, because the act generically states that a foodstuff which is sold must be safe and free of contamination. Now, clearly that doesn't help a company that wouldn't know what to test for. But once the issue of Listeria has become well known and it's an issue everywhere in the world, I think it would be very difficult for a company to say, but what do you expect us to test for? You know, there's millions of things one could test for, and you can't test for all of them. But there are some well-known pathogens that, although not listed, are likely to cause grave illness and should be tested for.
Absolutely. And I think this is where, if you're implementing a food safety management system, you are told in the standards to consult epidemiological data, because although we may not have a lot of documented cases in South Africa, Listeria is not a new organism. There have been outbreaks that have been recorded in many parts of the world since the 80s, and there are a number of foodstuffs that are often associated with this particular organism. And I think, the Department of Health have indicated this. The National Institute for Communicable Diseases have also indicated on their communication the foodstuffs that are most commonly associated with this pathogen. So I think in that regard, people that are manufacturing or processing dairy products, people that are dealing with processed meats, they're definitely on that list, and they're on that list around the world. So therefore, they should be consulting this. They should be consulting this information.
So, I see a comment from Anthony Obilana, and I agree with that as well, of course, is that, a producer who says, well, we're testing only for the things in the regulations, we don't possibly know what else we could test for. Clearly also have to consider what raw materials are they using, what processing methods are they using, etc., to know that they should be also testing for other pathogens.
Of course. Yes, absolutely. And I agree with what Antoinette is saying, is that I'm not sure about most suppliers, but I think suppliers to the retail industry most definitely are testing for Listeria in their shelf life verification, in their product testing, hopefully environmental swabs and not just the product testing. But I think we have to be careful when we say most suppliers, because there are many smaller suppliers. There are many suppliers that are not supplying the retail industry. And so I think we do have to be careful in that generalization. That would be where my concern is. For those of you that are supplying the retailers and the QSRs, absolutely, you're doing the right thing. And I think now we understand why we're doing it. The problem with this organism is that there is normally such a high rate of death as a result of the infection. And that's what we're seeing in this outbreak. It's not unique to us. If you look around the world, you'll see the similar statistics. And so because the consequences are so grave, it's absolutely imperative that we continue with this testing, and even more to make sure that the products are, safe for human consumption. Okay, so if I do have product which has tested positive, Janusz, in terms of the legal requirements, what you're saying to me is that I should be taking action to ensure that the product does not reach the consumer or does not harm the consumer in any way. So I suppose I have a number of options, and the one option I think is in line with the Consumer Protection Act in terms of recalling that product. So how does the Consumer Protection Act cover this particular situation?
The Consumer Protection Act, as I always just like to remind people, isn't specific to food. It says nothing specifically about food. It's about any consumer product, and food being one of them. So the way it deals with it is it says that if you are selling a product and it turns out to be unsafe or hazardous, or quite frankly, even of very poor quality, you have the obligation to conduct a recall. Yes. If you do not conduct your own voluntary recall, the National Consumer Commission may order a recall, as they did recently, for example, with the Ford Kruger saga. Now, in the case of foodstuff, I think a National Consumer Commission ordered recall is too late. That process takes too long. Too many people could die or become very seriously ill. And from the perspective of industry, you would be liable for all of that to those individuals. So it would be in your own interest to conduct a comprehensive consumer recall, not just quarantine, withdraw from sale, actually conducting a proper recall down to consumer level, getting products out of pantries and fridges, so to speak.
Yes, absolutely. And we've not seen many of those, regardless of the Consumer Protection Act, that there have been some, not for Listeria, obviously, but we have seen some of those. But it doesn't happen with nearly the same frequency that it happens in the US or in the UK.
What I'd like to say about Listeria, which makes it very problematic, is that the period of incubation is so long that by the time people realize there's a Listeria outbreak, assuming it's perishable foodstuffs, all of those particular foodstuffs have already long been eaten. So theoretically, a recall sounds like a logical step, but in fact, practically, it may serve absolutely no purpose unless it's a contamination at factory level or it's some systemic contamination which is ongoing, because 70 days after you have eaten a product, the chance that there would still be a fresh product on the shelves is virtually nil.
Absolutely. Now, based on the information that we have from the National Institute of Communicable Disease, they're saying on average in this particular outbreak, the incubation period is about 21 days. So it doesn't seem to be as long as it could be. So they're saying that. The other thing that they're saying, that they're fairly certain that it is a single source. So it could be a systemic issue in a particular facility, and we may be able to identify it once we identify the facility. They have also been quite careful with regards to stereotyping this particular organism. So we haven't just identified it as Listeria monocytogenes, we've actually gone further than that to identify its particular genetic makeup. And the information that they've issued is that they are convinced that it is a single source based on the fact that 71% of the cases, the Listeria isolate has the same genetic makeup. So in this case, once we identify the facility, we will be able to identify the Listeria species, monocytogenes serotype in that particular facility, and then link it back to the outbreak. So they will definitely be, they will definitely be able to confirm that it was that Listeria that outbreak.
Yeah, I'm seeing the comment from Juliet, and exactly what went through my mind when you said it was, yes, hang on, if they know it's 21 days, they must know what the origin is, because how do they know when to start counting the 21 days?
No. Okay. All right. So what they've done, and again, in terms of the article that we've written, I've tried to follow the chain of thought. What we must understand, people, is the first report in the press was issued in the beginning of September. So we are now sitting in the beginning of December, but at the beginning of September this year, there were already 190 cases that had been identified. Alerted the doctors, formal communication has gone out to the doctors, formal communication that they've asked the clinician to complete when they've identified the patient is suffering from listeriosis. From the completed information that they have available, they haven't been able to get all this information on all of the patients, but of the information that they've been able to collect, the average incubation period that they have determined from interviewing the patient is 21 days. So they don't know the actual source. You'll see I've actually given you the link on the article to the form that they're using. The form asks about food that's being eaten, but here you're asking people to go back, a couple of weeks, and this has been through interviewing. They've now collected this information. So that's how they've determined the 21 days, and it's an average of the data that they've collected. They don't know the actual source. Again, I think coming from the minister yesterday, I don't think that he would have said that unless, unless he actually knew. Okay, I've lost Janusz, so I'm just going to put Janusz back on the stage. Give me a second so that we can just at least see him and hear him. We've dropped the signal on his side. Okay, so don't panic. In that regard, we'll get him back as soon as we possibly can. Right, yes, I'm sure that there are lots of WhatsApps that are out there warning the public about processed meat, fresh produce. I don't think that there's, anything internet. If you take the communication that's come directly from the National Institute of Communicable Disease, they have actually identified those food sources as well, and those are the things that have actually been put forward, as in terms you should be doing. They have been tracking an outbreak. Yes, the statistics are available. In terms of what is notifiable, I think we need to read between the not read between the lines, but we need to look very carefully at what our law says. The first cases were I think they are looking for a product that has repeated contamination and a longer products like processed meats, where it's not necessarily just going to be consumed or prepared today and eaten today. Yes, I think it's. I think if you have a look at the current epidemiological data, Anthony, it's stats show us that is still, or rather, those are still the risk populations, the susceptible population. But I have to agree with you. In relation to foodborne illness in general, we do have very large categories that could, fall into this. And so, from that perspective, I couldn't agree with you more. That we should be doing a lot more in this regard anyway, because of the people that we're actually feeding on a day-to-day basis. And it's nothing special. It's just every day. This is who we feed. We feed people that are in fact suffering from HIV, and we feed the elderly, and we feed people that are immunocompromised. Okay, I'm struggling to get Janusz back up again, but I'm keeping on trying while I'm trying to chat to you at the same time. So yeah, I'm really doing my multitasking at the moment. Hi, I'm just looking to see who else has joined us. Karen, thank you so much for actually taking the time. Karen is from the Chilled Foods Association in the UK. Uli, hi Uli from NSF. Rosie, great to have you with us. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the other issues that I'd hoped to speak to Janusz about. I'm hoping that he's logging in again and we'll be able to get him back up. I see he's back up, so we'll try the share screen again and see whether we can get him up to be able to talk to us. Okay, Janusz is logged in, so that's great, and I've sent the request, Janusz, so maybe we can just chat that way. Possibly in the meantime, Janusz, if there are some questions that you could answer, you can just pop us a recording. Yeah, please don't be concerned if you can't hear anything or you can't hear it clearly. The recording will definitely capture everything in that regard. Okay, Janusz, just in terms of a further sort of development, do you think that this particular outbreak is going to prompt further regulation in this regard? Should this be a natural outcome of this, of this particular outbreak? I am of the opinion that there should most definitely be a review of the legislation so that we have specific regulations in that regard. I'm hoping that would be an outcome, right? So you expect that the regulations will be amended. I think one thing from industry's perspective, we've been asked to contribute to the collection of data, the collection of information. And I think it's only when the Department of Health has statistics that they are in a better position to understand exposure rates, exposure levels, in order to do a proper risk assessment and even to then include this in regulation. So as Janusz said earlier, we should be using this window of opportunity, and we should be, contributing to what, the Department of Health is actually Institute of Communicable Disease. Obviously, they're associated to the Department of Health, Anthony. I think if you go and look at the information that they've actually been communicating, they have really been trying to indicate how serious it is. I do think that we don't want to cause a panic as far as the public is concerned. I think for the minister to come out yesterday and to make the statement, I think we need to appreciate that they are aware of the seriousness of the situation. We already have 36 dead people, and most of those are babies, less than 28 days. And so I think at the end of the day, this is very serious. We cannot afford to sweep this one under the carpet, and I think as industry that needs to be our standpoint. We should not be doing so. Yes, Karen, I think one of the things that we need to be taking more seriously is looking at environmental sampling, and making sure that we are focusing on environmental sampling. Again, this is not part of our legal framework currently. It is part of what the retailers are asking us to do, but it's not something that is necessarily, coming from the governance perspective. As far as the information that is available, if there are, I know there's a couple of questions relating, do we think it's coming from a hospital? I don't think that they think that, because if you look at the outbreak statistics, there are cases in KwaZulu-Natal, Cape Town, as well as in the as in Gauteng, most prominently in Gauteng. That's great. Thank you, Karen. Thank you so much for sharing the guidance. I think the CFA guidance is actually really great, and so it would be a good starting point for industry in that regard. Janusz, yes, I think this is the point that we all wanted to ask you. If people are affected and they can prove that they've been affected by Listeria, can obviously claim. And I think there are, we're back. It's a good question. We'll have to ask. Obviously, you've got the National Laboratory Health Services that are in. Here are blood tests. And there's a process that the National Institute of Communicable Diseases have actually published to indicate how they go about Listeria and the listeriosis. So that's also available. It's also in the public domain. And so I've provided you with those links. I think the difficulty, as you're saying, Janusz, is that how can we link it back? How can we link it back? And also, again, I think if we find the source, the source will obviously tell us whether or not the listeriosis is associated with a particular manufacturer, Janusz. And I think in that regard, in this case, because we've actually gone to isolate level, there will be a lot more discussion. It's not just the 21 days from in that perspective. Yes, I agree with you, Anthony. Should we not be able to, or rather, should companies not be compelled? At the moment, as we've said earlier, companies are being requested to share their information. I think the sooner we find the source, the sooner we'll be able to stop this particular problem. And again, the purpose of this webinar was really to encourage you to use this window and to make sure that we are being as transparent as we possibly can. If there are any other questions, we've seen Janusz has confirmed the anonymity and the fact that we should be taking this anonymity into account. In terms of the recalls of product, I think at the end of the day, the request is being made for people to act responsibly. I'm sure that there should be some additional, testing that is taking place. Area, found in soil. So yes. As far as our time is concerned, our time is almost up. Thank you so much for the questions. You can keep the questions coming, and we will try and address some of those questions, during the course of our articles. Janusz is also posing the question. Janusz, I think as far as the quality of water is concerned, again coming back to those that are supplying the retailers, we are required to test our water. I think questions regarding the But again, I think in terms of the shelf life of the product, the amount of time associated with the incubation of the particular illness, food is definitely the primary source that is being considered in the outbreak. If you look at what the scientists are telling us, that's essentially where they're looking. They're looking at food. They're not specifically looking at at water, at a water source. Whether that's how the Listeria has gotten into the processing plant, I think we can't necessarily discount that in terms of cross-contamination, but they're looking in this case at food being the primary source. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. We've got about 4 minutes left, so any further questions, we would appreciate those. You're welcome to send them to me. You see my email. I'll pass those on to Janusz. If we can, get him to comment, we will most definitely do that. And obviously, in terms of the broadcast today, this will be recorded, so if there's people that haven't seen it, please feel free to share it. Please make sure you do look at the information that is available. There is information from the National Institute of Communicable Diseases, who have actually been testing and been monitoring the outbreak. They provided quite a lot of information, so please won't you check out that information. Karen is kindly going to share the CFA guidance with us. We'll make sure that you get that link as well. And if there are any other questions, we'd be very happy to answer that. In closing, our appeal is, please share the information. Let's find the source. Let's pull together as the industry. Let's do what's responsible. We're asking you to cooperate in that regard. We're also asking you to make sure that you are looking at your products and being responsible about your products. If you've got a problem, then now's the right time to do something about it. Let's share this information with senior management if you need to, in order to get their commitment. This is now about your brand reputation, but it's also about your ethics. So let's use this opportunity. It's extremely sad. It's appalling, in fact, that we've had this level of loss of life. Let's do the right thing. This is why we all do food safety. It's why we're passionate about food safety. So let's make sure we're doing the right thing in this regard, and let's come clean. If we need to make improvements, let's do that at the end of the day. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. We appreciate your participation, and we will stay in touch. Please, keep your eyes posted. We don't want to create any sensationalism. We don't want to create panic, but we do want to encourage industry to be responsible in this regard. So thank you for your comments. Thanks for being with us today, and we'll chat again soon. Have a good afternoon.